How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video here on the Nat Automotive YouTube channel, and in today's video I'm going to be continuing on the repairs for the C5 Corvette front bumper, which is all part of the big street legal go-kart vet kart project. But like I said in my previous videos, I gotta fix this thing up and get it roadworthy so I can register it before the real build begins. So that's what I'll be doing in today's videos. Stay tuned. So thank you so much, guys, for joining me again on another video. If you're new to the channel, definitely check out my other videos because I do all sorts of stuff with automotive related content. I've got a C55 AMG parked out there. I've got a Corvette vet kart project, and I do a bunch of stuff with go-karts as well, which I'll be doing more in the future here. I apologize for being a little MIA over the past month and a half. For those that follow me on my Instagram, if you don't, here's my little handle. For those that follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I just graduated from graduate school. I was getting my master's degree in mechanical engineering. So this past month and a half was a lot of work getting my classes wrapped up and getting my thesis finished and submitted for publishing to make sure that I graduated on time. So I was really tied up in all that, which is why I really had no time to work on anything in the garage here. But now I've got a little downtime before starting my new job, so I thought I'd get started with working on this bumper because we got a lot to do to get this Corvette registered. If you guys haven't checked out my previous repair video or part 1 on repairing this Corvette bumper, I basically started by sanding down the front of the bumper here, getting the surface as level as possible, and then masking some of these cracks with tape to try and keep the cracks at a consistent gap. And so in addition to sanding this down to try and get the surface prepped and everything, I also drilled some holes to prevent the cracks from propagating, and also prepped the inside here, trying to groove out the crack to get better penetration, because the original goal was I was trying to plastic weld this. But if you watch the video, you'll know that I found out that this is a special type of thermoset plastic called SMC, or sheet molded compound. Now there's two main types of polymers or plastics used in cars and everyday items. There's thermosets and there's thermoplastics. Thermoplastics are more common. They're the types of plastics that can be melted into their original material and then remelted again multiple times without burning and retaining most of their material properties and strength properties. Thermoset plastics are a little bit different in the sense that a lot of the times a chemical reaction is performed when making the original plastic, and the nature of the polymer molecular structure is there's a lot of these cross-linked bonds that prevent the material from being remelted. It's kind of like once it's set in its original shape, it won't remelt, it'll just burn, which is what I found out when I was trying to plastic weld this little section here. It was just burning the plastic. So SMC is a special type of thermoset that GM used with the Corvettes, at least the front bumper and the rear bumper. A lot of the other panels were just fiberglass. But basically the reason why they used this SMC thermoset plastic for these bumpers was it had the mold release agent mixed into the plastic itself when it was pumped into the mold. So that way they didn't have to prep the mold beforehand with mold release agent. The mold was already prepped and the material had the release agent mixed into itself, so they can make these parts a lot quicker. So I'm going to stop blabbering here. The moral of the story is since I can't plastic weld this, you know, there are some different types of epoxies that you can buy specifically for SMC, but the problem is I found that a lot of them are really expensive and they're hard to get because SMC is not a very common material. So my effort here, or what I'm going to do today, is try and epoxy this crack here with this special JB Weld plastic bonder. I'm not sure if this is going to work. I did try and research online, and it seems like this is pretty robust stuff, and it says it works on thermoset, carbon fiber composites, thermoplastics, a bunch of different materials. So I'm hoping for good results with this. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little mixture of this on a plate, and I'm still going to reinforce the crack here, and I'm going to put the epoxy over and mix it into the metal mesh that I was going to use for the plastic welding to kind of give some extra strength to reinforcing the crack. And then once I do that, and this crack gets all filled, I got to do one up here as well. Then I got some, this is going to be my first time trying this, but I got some Bondo glass. So this is just fiberglass reinforced body filler. So then I can try and prep the front of the bumper and sand it down, and then we can throw a little primer on it, and then this thing will be done. So the first step, what I'm going to do so that I'm best prepared when I get all the plastic, the epoxy mixed together, because I only get a certain amount of working time. But if you remember my last video, the plastic welding kit came with this wire mesh here, and this is kind of like similar to why they put rebar in concrete. It just gives a little bit of strength, a little bit of extra strength to the bond, and it prevents the crack from growing and separating again. So what I'm going to do is cut a few more pieces of this, obviously cut the old gunk out of here, but like I said in my last video, you want about a ½ inch on each side of the crack, so this is about 1 inch wide. So I'm going to cut a bunch of these pieces and just get them ready so that when I get this epoxy mixed together, I can just kind of lay these pieces in here and then kind of embed the epoxy into this, and of course onto the crack as well. So one other thing I'm going to do before I lay down the epoxy, I'm going to just clean the surface with some rubbing alcohol here, just because the bumper's been sitting in the garage for a while since I worked on it last, and it's probably accumulated some dust and grime. And so you want to clean the surface as best you can so that the epoxy has a clean surface to bind to and bite onto as well. It's got a little bowl here. This is from packaging for some masks that I bought. So basically you're just going to extrude out. So it's a 2-part epoxy, so we got a chemical reaction going on here, and epoxy is a thermoset plastic because it is undergoing a chemical reaction to harden the plastic here. So I'm going to squeeze a good amount out. So I might have to do this in a few stages here depending on the working time, and then once you get some extruded out, it comes with a little mini popsicle stick, and you just want to really mix this stuff together really well before you lay it down. And I've also got some spatulas that I'm going to use to try and lay this down as smoothly as possible. Alrighty, so I went to the store real quick just to grab another packet of this plastic Bondo epoxy, just to add a little bit more on the edges of the mesh here. So you can see, so it's been about 15 minutes, and the stuff, you know, it's still tacky, but it doesn't, like, my finger's not absolutely sticking in it. And it's definitely, you know, keeping the mesh down, which is nice. So I think what I'm going to try and do with this extra packet is get some of the edges, or I'm going to put some rubber gloves on and try and push down some of these edges to try and get the mesh to adhere a little bit more to the shape of the bumper, and then we'll start filling in the edges with more epoxy. I got to do a few more touch-ups up here. There's another one up here, especially because this is like a mounting point for the bumper, and we'll keep going and chugging along. Alrighty everyone, so here is the finished product. It isn't as pretty as I would like it to be, but I'm just hoping it's functional. I was able to really embed the epoxy into the mesh here. There's only one spot right there at the tip of the flashlight where it kind of kept lifting up. I couldn't get the mesh to kind of bend to the shape there, but that's just one part. Everywhere else is really well just coated with the epoxy. I used my finger with the rubber gloves on to just kind of smear it all on there and, you know, mix the epoxy into the different, you know, parts of the mesh and around the cracks. And I think it's gonna, you know, as long as the epoxy binds to this type of, you know, thermoset SMC plastic, I think we should be okay, and it should be a, you know, pretty solid repair. Granted, if I was doing this to keep the bumper for a long time, probably would just buy a new bumper, but this will do for now. So I'm gonna let this cure and everything. It takes a few hours to fully cure and harden up. It's got a 15-minute working time before it gets really tacky, but it takes a little longer to cure. So I'm gonna let this cure, and then we can you know, see how it held up, and then we'll flip this thing over, take the tape off the front, and start working on the Bondo glass and body filler. Alright, so initial impressions of the repair, it looks really good. It looks like it held really nicely with all the cracks. This little part here, it did kind of raise itself up again, and that might have been from me kind of pushing on the other side to get the mesh to stick in. So I'm going to have to sand this down as best I can. And again, and this is my first time doing this, so, you know, probably this bumper is not gonna mean a whole lot because this is gonna get torn down into a vet cart at some point. So I thought I'd use this opportunity to kind of just give my hand at some basic body work. So, you know, yeah, it's not gonna be perfect, but I think it turned out pretty well as far as being able to seal up the cracks here, and even partially filled this little hole here. And then I'll just have to take off this one last final piece to see how the edge repaired. But this little part right here, kind of hard to see with the shadow, but there was a crack and went all the way to the edge, and it seemed to bond that pretty well also. So I'm gonna go ahead and prep this thing down, and I'm gonna get the DA sander out, and we'll give another quick sand, especially just to get some of the adhesive off that's remaining from the duct tape that was on here. Alrighty, so finished all the sanding and the prep, at least as much as I could do here with my skill level. But I think I did a pretty decent job prepping this for the Bondo glass. I did sand this down quite a bit more to try and get these cracks to line up better so that it's easier when putting on the Bondo glass and then having to sand that down. So, you know, I think the surface is pretty well prepped. This bumper's not perfect. It's got a lot of imperfections. I mean, there's a lot of like wrinkles in the paint from when it got hit, so then it caused the bumper to flex and crack paint in different areas. But just trying to fix this up, you know, enough to where I can put it back on the car and it's not going to fall apart on me. Throw some primer on it, you know, and call it a day. And we'll get this thing registered. So now let's go ahead and we'll mix up some Bondo glass along with the hardener here on a little spatula or a little plate, and then mix it together, and we'll start slathering it on there, and then we'll wait for it to dry and sand it down. Well, if you guys are going to buy this stuff, just know that you don't need to buy hardener. It comes with it. I just didn't realize it was inside the little cap that comes on top. So save yourself $6 and know that this comes with hardener, so you don't have to buy it. Looks like we got some stirring to do. Separate it a little bit. So you can see this is the fiberglass stuff. You can see the strands hanging off there, so it's a little bit better than the standard Bondo. But I know with this stuff you can't get as smooth as a surface finish, so a lot of people recommend doing this and then standard Bondo after. But we'll see how this stuff turns out, and then we'll go from there, depending on if I want to do a extra layer of Bondo, since this bumper is not really going to be the most pretty. Likes to stick together. Again, because of the fiberglass, probably. So we'll see how well I get my hardener mixture here. This is my first time doing this, so. I've seen a lot of people, they just kind of do a line across their pile there of Bondo. So we'll see. Then you're supposed to like kind of knead it this way. You're not supposed to stir it because then it introduces air bubbles. And you're supposed to do this till it gets somewhat uniform in color. Now you're starting the chemical reaction when you add the hardener. A lot of people say try and make smooth, like, you know, passes with the shape and contour of the bumper to spread this stuff out as best you can. I'm definitely going to need more. And you want to cake it on a little bit thicker so that when you sand it down, you're not sanding down into the bumper itself, you're kind of just sanding that layer of Bondo glass off. Alright guys, so here is the Bondo glass job that I finished here. Sorry I couldn't give you a little bit better angle while I was doing it, I just needed the room to work. But it is not perfect. You know, like I said, this is my first time doing this, so, you know, I'm going to have some trial and error here. So if you're an expert body shop guy and you're just going to rail me in the comments, save it. Don't need that. But yeah, I think overall it turned out pretty good. It's definitely getting tacky, so I know that at least the hardener is working to some degree. I didn't put way too little because I was afraid that if I didn't put enough, this stuff was never going to harden. But I do know you're kind of supposed to put this stuff on thick, and so then it gives you more material to work with when you got to sand it down in the next process once it dries up. So you can see here, got my layer, tried my best to just spread it out with my little spatula as best I can in long strokes here. And so this was the main area, obviously with all the cracking that needed to be fixed the greatest. And then there were some areas up to the top here that also needed some fixing as well. Did some on the bottom here and on this side as well. So thought it seems pretty good so far. I also, what I did was, so there's supposed to be actually a hole right here, but the epoxy, it was a hard time trying to completely get the crack to fill in with the epoxy on the edge here, so I just covered the whole hole with Bondo glass, the top and bottom, and then I'll just drill out that hole later when it comes time to finishing the stuff up. So with the extra Bondo, because I did mix up a lot the second time, I just kind of caked it on the back side of the bumper here to get some more strength to the epoxy, and the mesh behind ran out for the bottom down there. But you know, I think overall for the most part it looks pretty good, and I think it should give a lot more stronger of a bond with all of this on there. So now I gotta wait for this stuff to dry. I don't know how long that's gonna be, so I might have to resume in a little while. And then the next step is kind of doing that sanding process all over again. 80 grit, 120 grit, or 220 grit, and then we'll throw some primer on this bad boy and call it a day. Alright everyone, so it is the next day here, and I have waited for the Bondo glass to completely dry and set so that it doesn't gum up my sanding pads here, but it seems like it's set pretty nicely. You can see I started just kind of seeing how it sanded a little bit here with a little sanding block, but it seems very strong. It seems like it really helped to reinforce the cracked area, and you know, I did a few spots down here. I should have, there's a little spot right here, I should have put some in. Maybe I'll go back after I do this part and fill that in. Alrighty, so much sanding with the DA sander later. I'm getting pretty dusty. The Corvette here is getting pretty dusty as well. I probably should have done this a little bit more outside, but whatever. But man, all I have to say right now is if you do body work for a living, props to you, because this stuff is not easy. It's definitely hard manual labor, but I'm sure if you do this on the daily, you obviously know the tips and tricks on what to do here. So because I put on so much Bondo glass, it's taken a long time to get this nice and smooth, at least as best as I can. So you know, I've been using an 80 grit pad on the DA sander, and you know, you can see it's definitely gotten a lot better. Now what I'm finding is, and from what I've read too, is the Bondo glass is good for, you know, strengthening repairs, large areas that need to be repaired, but when it gets down to the fine nitty-gritty of sanding and preparing, there's a lot of pits. I don't know if that was me introducing air bubbles when I was mixing the hardener in, or if that's just the nature of the material, but I think I'm at the point where I might need to go grab some just typical regular Bondo and put a layer of that on to get it nice and smooth. Now, some of you might be wondering, why are you spending so much time on a bumper that you're eventually just going to rip off the car? Well, yes, that is the case, but like I said earlier, I want to use this as a learning experience to kind of just teach myself and, you know, try my hand at bodywork, because there's not a lot of risk involved if I mess it up here. You know, so I've been working hard with the DA sander, and I've also been taking this 80 grit sanding block and kind of going at an angle. So from what I've read, you're supposed to kind of go across like this and then switch and then kind of make an X across the surface here, so you don't groove in and you maintain the contour shape to the bumper. And so what I've found is, I think there's a little bit of a high spot here and a high spot here and a low spot here, and you can kind of see that from the marks from the DA sander. It's sanding a lot here, sanding here, and then there's a little bit of darkness here indicating it's not getting into that area as much. And I think this is the area where the bumper wasn't even to begin with, so I'm trying my best to smooth it out as best I can, but I think that might be what the Bondo will come in handy for, is giving me a nice smooth surface to work with, and then to kind of get it as smooth as possible. And then there's some small crack, like a crack here that I missed, and some part here and up here that I missed that I could fill in with the Bondo. So I'm going to start working a little bit more at the sanding block to try and get this as a little bit better. And I also have a 220 sanding block, but I'm going to refocus the camera so you can see the pits that So I don't know how well this comes across on camera, but there's some little pits. You can kind of see them up there, across. So, and I did get filler primer, so I'm hoping that the filler primer will help to kind of fill in this spot, and then I can sand that primer down once it dries. So maybe I won't try the Bondo for now, and I'll just try the filler primer, although these areas up here, like this stuff here, and then this crack here will definitely need Bondo, and then I missed a little spot down here as well. So I might just get Bondo just to cover all my bases and try and do this as best as possible, just to, you know, make the learning experience as good as possible. And you can see I also hit a low spot right here, so it might just help me to get a more smooth surface without waves in it. But I think so far it's you know, it's pretty good given my experience of zero bodywork before this. Alrighty, so I spent some more time with the sanding block to try and get this thing as smooth as possible. So far it's turning out really well. It's actually going above my expectations, especially since I have zero experience doing any kind of body work. But so far what I've been seeing, as I mentioned earlier, there was just some pitting in the Bondo glass material, which was to be expected based on what I read from forums. A lot of people said you could fill that in with glazing putty, or I'm just going to use Bondo, regular Bondo, to get that smooth surface, because also there is still some waviness in the surface. So if I run my hand across here, about high spot here, low spot, and then high spot again. So there's a little bit of waviness. Before we even started this, the bumper was really distorted here from the accident, so there was already waviness in the material before we even started doing body work. But hopefully just adding this last layer of Bondo and then filler primer at the end will help to give us as smooth as a surface as possible, and also to fill in some of the cracks, like here. These aren't really cracks, these are more like gouges that I missed with the Bondo glass. But let's see if I can show you guys a little bit of the waviness. I don't know if it's coming across on camera, but there is just a little bit of waviness in the material. It's really not bad. I did go ahead and patch. I sanded this stuff down here because there's a hole here. There's supposed to be a hole here, but I filled that in to fix the bumper because it was cracked all the way to the very tip of the bumper here. So I'll just re-drill a new hole and sand that out at the end. But I did kind of sand down the inside where I had the Bondo glass, but I didn't want to waste a whole lot of time and all my sanding pads trying to get this smooth, because in reality no one's going to see this, and I'd rather have this thicker so that it's a little bit stronger as well. But overall, I've been pretty happy with the results so far. I don't know if you can see the waviness in this section. Yeah, you can kind of see it a little bit there. So I'm going to try my best to smooth this out as best I can with this Bondo. I just got to run to Home Depot to grab some more of that stuff. Alrighty, got some good old-fashioned Bondo from Home Depot. Let's go ahead and divvy some out here. I'm mixing some hardener. Now I have no idea how much I need, so I'm going to start with that and hope that's enough. I don't want to go too thick with this stuff, just because I've already got the surface pretty smooth for the most part. Make sure I do these cracks too. I must have overdone a little bit on the hardener, because this stuff tacked up, I think, within 5 minutes of, I don't know if that's normal. I guess I could read the directions, but I think I got everything I needed to get on there. So now I'm just going to let this stuff harden up, and then I think I'm going to lay off with the DA sander for now. Oh, darn it. I forgot one other spot down here. I'm going to have to put a little piece on. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, and I'm gonna then, once it tacks up, and I'll just go over it with the sanding blocks to try and keep this as uniform as possible, because I know with the power sanders it's really easy to grind down and get low spots and stuff. So hopefully this works out good, but pretty happy with the results so far. Alright everyone, so we are back again here, another day. This has been a multiple day project for sure, just because I've been having to wait for this stuff to set so I can sand it. But I left you guys off. I put some actual Bondo on the bumper yesterday, and now I'm going to try and just use a sanding block to smooth it out. Might have to use the DA sander to get some of this thick area off, but I'm trying to use the Bondo here to get rid of the waviness in the bumper. So that's going to be the next step. Letting the Corvette run for a little bit, trying to, you know, let it run every few days here so that it doesn't sit too long. And the car did come with like actually 3/4 of a tank of gas, so I'm trying to use all this gas so it's not just sitting in here and going bad. But hopefully within the next month or so we can register this thing and drive it and use that tank of gas out on the road. So I'm gonna start sanding down the Bondo now, and hopefully this thing will then be ready for some primer. Okay, so sanding is pretty much complete. I had to first use the DA sander with the 80 grit block or sanding pad on it to really get some of the rough parts of the Bondo when I just laid it down with the spatula off. So I needed that, and then I went over it with 220. Then I switched to the block sander, the 80 grit block sander, and just did it by hand. And then I did 220 block sander. And from the most part, it looks really good and it feels really smooth. There is still a little bit of waviness. This is still, you can probably see here, this is a high spot, and then obviously where there's still Bondo are the lower spots. I tried my best to get this down as much as I could, but I think that's just the best it's going to be right now for this stage of the bumper repair. But everything else is shaping up really nice. There's just still some pitting in the areas where the Bondo glass was, but like I said earlier, I did get filler primer, so I'm hoping the filler primer helps to kind of fill in some of those spots. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give this thing a solid wipe down, at least the area where I'm going to be painting with primer with mineral spirits, and then I'm going to throw a layer of primer on there, let that dry, sand that, and then hopefully just do one more layer of primer and we'll be good to go. Okay, so first layer of primer has been put on. I then sanded that down and then re-primered, so there's 2 layers of primer on now. The first layer was a little bit rough. I don't know if that was a material interaction problem with the bumper, if it was due to some impurities, but I sanded it down and then threw on a second layer here, and it's looking a lot better. So I'm going to let this dry and see how it looks after it dries for a bit, and then I'll go from there if I want to add a 3rd layer of primer or not. And that will pretty much conclude fixing the bumper for now. Obviously, I would like to paint it red so that it all matches, but that's a whole extra step. And this is just, again, to get it registered, so a primered bumper is just fine. Alright everyone, so I'm going to leave it at that. I thought that 2 coats of primer was pretty good for now. If I want to add one later, I will, but I think for now that's pretty dang good. I'm pretty happy with the results of fixing the bumper repair on the Corvette. Now granted, it's not up to body shop standards, but I exceeded my expectations in what I was able to do for my very first time ever doing any kind of body work. And if you do body work as a daily job, props to you, because that is not easy by any means. So I apologize if this video was a little bit more drawn out. There were just a lot of steps involved, a lot of waiting for stuff to dry and things like that. But if you stuck to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I'm really excited to see how this project comes along. In the next video, it'll either be me fixing the front crash bar or the hood over there. I haven't decided which one I want to do first yet after the bumper. But thank you all so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, definitely hit that subscribe button for a lot of really cool content to come on the Corvette go-kart. A lot of stuff to come in the future. And thanks again, guys, and I will see you in the next one.